Hello? Hi. Hi, everyone. First, I want to start by saying thank you to the Columbus Foundation and the School of Architecture for giving me this opportunity to travel, and also to Chris Perry from the Office of International Affairs for awarding me with the Global Gateway Grant, which also supplemented this travel. Without these two funding sources, this research trip would not have been possible. So this is my presentation on Rotterdam, City and Water, and this is Miffy. Miffy was created by the Dutch artist Dick Bruna in 1955. She's more or less like the Hello Kitty of the Netherlands, and I chose this image because it encapsulates a big part of my focus in the Netherlands this past summer: Dutch design, water, and shipping. When I was considering applying for an ARTA grant last winter, my idea was to study the waterfront in Rotterdam. The identity of the Dutch landscape has long been defined by water more than anything else. The Dutch are well known for how they have adapted, shaped, and managed the land to live with water. Over time, the adaptive measures towards managing the land have become protective measures, most importantly to protect the nearly 1/3 of the country that lies below sea level. As I was preparing my proposal, I quickly realized that to study the waterfront in Rotterdam means that there would be a huge focus on the port of Rotterdam. The port is of great significance not only to the economic vitality of the country, but to all of Europe. Rotterdam is the main port for shipping goods to and from Europe, and it is the 4th busiest port in the world. To give some context, here's a map and an aerial image of Rotterdam. Laser pointer. So Rotterdam City is all the way to the right in both of these images, and the port extends down the river all the way out to the mouth. Here is Rotterdam City, and this is the port that is extending all the way up the Maas River to the North Sea, and I'll talk more about that a little later. The Dutch have a saying about Rotterdam and its economic status in the country. They say that Rotterdam brings the money, the political power in Den Haag manages the money, and then Amsterdam spends the money. Historically, Rotterdam has always been an important port city. This is a Delfshaven, which is what the early Rotterdam harbors would have looked like. This place is within the present-day city limits of Rotterdam, but it is one of the only remaining ports of the old harbor. And that is because at the beginning of World War II, Rotterdam was bombed and most of the city was completely destroyed. The bombing left Rotterdam in what is frequently referred to as a tabula rasa, which is Latin for blank slate. This blank slate meant that they had to rebuild the city from scratch, and the planning for that began mere days after the bombing attack. The city was planned using the principles of, pardon my French, but Congrès International d'Architecture Moderne, otherwise known as the CIAM principles. This was the beginning of Rotterdam's reputation as a city known for its examples of modern architecture. 70 years after the bombing attack, this West 8 project was unveiled. These lights permanently mark the areas that were destroyed by the attack. The light emblems are embedded in the sidewalk and they illuminate in the evening. It is always easier to make a connection with a place if you can understand its cultural values and historic events, and this project helps you understand those things. I found that my independent study of Rotterdam waterfront was definitely an exercise that challenged my own cultural intelligence. I was challenged to acknowledge the impact that my own background in design education was having on my interpretation of the landscape. I was fortunate to stay in the Netherlands for 4 weeks because it took some time before I could really understand the city. The people who live in Rotterdam embrace the water and understand the value and unique experiences that can come with living by the water. Water is their history and identity. The way the Dutch live with the water and use their waterfront has been culturally defined over hundreds of years, which is how we have come to the hot tub. This is a wood-fired, steam-powered water vessel that is designed and made near Rotterdam. To ride the hot tub through the Luvehaven is a perfectly reasonable thing for some Rotterdammers. Luvehaven is one of the oldest original harbors in Rotterdam. It was constructed around 1600. And as you can probably tell, this harbor is now home to many preserved historic ships. This modern-day invention and its users find themselves comfortably and happily engaging the river among these maritime artifacts. And the point is that there are waterfront uses in and around Rotterdam that define the unique relationship between the people and the water. For example, here at Hoek van Holland, which is about 19 miles west of Rotterdam, there's an extremely popular beach. The beach area is across from the most modern part of the port of Rotterdam, and this is what it looks like. It's a busy place, and there isn't much concern for the surrounding port. I don't know if you can see, but this is the port in the background here, and here it's pretty apparent, I think. It's a pretty typical beach scene with a very dramatic industrial backdrop. Here you can see the large cranes and other machines that are part of the port operations as this woman wades into the water. The port of Rotterdam itself is a very popular place for the Dutch to visit and tour. There's a ferry that can take you there from Hoek van Holland. Once you arrive, there are bike lanes and a visitor center. The Maasvlakte 2 is the current expansion of the port, and this is why there are so many people visiting. It's a 2,500-acre expansion in an area that was previously 55 feet deep. By 2030, the Maasvlakte 2 will be fully developed. The rich shipping industry in Rotterdam makes this a point of pride and curiosity, which is why this is such a popular destination. This diagram shows how the port has expanded over the years. So the Maasvlakte 2 is on the end here. It began in 2008. And you can see over time, Rotterdam started the port and all the way back here, and it started in 1400. So slowly the port has grown out into the North Sea. And that's due to larger shipping infrastructure and cargo vessels that can't readily access the port in the interior of the land. The Maasvlakte 2 is really a fascinating place to visit. It's a spectacular marvel of industry, and the experience is confronting and disconcerting. It's so surreal that you feel like you could get lost or forgotten in the place, and you almost really feel like you could be in another planet. It seems fitting that the visitor center is called Future Land. Unfortunately, I think that the history of shipping has perpetuated a somewhat narrow vision of what the city's waterfront could be. Throughout the city, and the Netherlands in general, there are nice examples of design that have taken cues from the port industry. Here is an example of a West Gate project in Rotterdam, the Schaubert line. And you can see how these light structures really mimic the industrial crane structures. Another example is the Silo Dam in Amsterdam by MVRDV, and this is a typical shipping port container holding yard. Many parts of Rotterdam, which were once port harbors, have been redeveloped for new uses and functions. While touring throughout the city, I could see that those places have an industrial edge to them, but it wasn't really until I met Kees van der Wieken that I began to look at the Rotterdam waterfront in a different way. Kees explained that the post-industrial pier redevelopment is typically one-dimensional and only focused on the aspect of real estate. He said that the common rhetoric in Rotterdam is that the new, quote-unquote, Ramkoolhaus type building is thought to be the solution, but they usually forget about the spaces around the building. After meeting with Kees, I quickly started to see that this was an issue throughout the city. Here's one example of that concern. Some of the buildings here are old. I think actually only this one. But most all of them are new developments. Clearly this is a place where there was no thought given to the areas surrounding the buildings, which sit on prime waterfront real estate. This property faces onto the New Maas, which is the main waterfront channel through Rotterdam. And this property is also close in to downtown, so it's a pretty desirable place to live. It was redeveloped in 2008-2009 and suffered some of the same recession problems with housing as we did here in the US. So that probably doesn't really help the vapid feel of this place. And I can recognize that the open grass plains probably represent property that may be purchased for future development, but still it's pretty dismal. Here's another example. This one is even more perplexing because it's in a protected harbor, safe from the waves of the heavy boat traffic along the main channel. This is part of the Kop van Zuid, which translates to head of the south, which was a major redevelopment project in Rotterdam. This was clearly an old harbor and a pier, where large ships would come in and moor. Large ships could no longer enter this area, and now it only looks out of scale and forbidding. I wonder why they couldn't have at least developed a soft edge, for example, like this one. This is another well-protected harbor in Rotterdam, so the conditions are somewhat comparable. With a few subtle modifications, I think that last example could look more like this. Yet another example is this housing development adjacent to downtown Rotterdam. This is obviously on the waterfront of the Maas River, and all they have done here is put in these utterly depressing container planters. Otherwise, it is a hard, uninviting place to be. In this example, you can also see another distinct feature of the Rotterdam waterfront. There are no guardrails. The fact that there are no guardrails is a matter of practicality. Both private and public boats are allowed to tie up to this pier, and that is pretty much the case throughout the entire city. There are rarely ever guardrails, and typically there would be cleats, such as those, for securing your boat. I think this guy looks as though he could just roll off the edge into the river. And I think that says a lot about, I think the lack of the guardrails says a lot about how the public is expected to take responsibility for their own actions, which is quite different from how we do it here. And this photo is actually taken at a spot where there is a more well-designed waterfront. And that is at the Hotel New York, which is also on the Kop van Zuid. This is a very historic building. This is the hotel right here. And it was the original Holland America Line headquarters. It was renovated and opened as a hotel in 1993. And considering that it is a hotel where tourists will stay, it makes sense that they would address the waterfront with more care and specific aesthetic improvements. There are other examples of steps in the right direction. This is a waterfront drive, downtown Rotterdam. And I only realized that what I actually saw was an improvement when I went searching for this site on Google Maps and saw this. I was going to be critical of this one, but even this is a modest improvement from what it was. The improvement is a relatively simple one too, which could seemingly be introduced in other areas around the city. De Urbanisten, an urban design firm in Rotterdam, has also created other conceptual plans to enhance the stretch of the waterfront even more. Most Dutch people know how to experience, live with, and enjoy the water. To live with the water is a way of life in the Netherlands, whether it is to use the water ferries, hot tubs, or waterfront bike lanes. And to note, these waterfront bike lanes are mostly used for commuting, not recreation, although they are recreational as well. And this is just to share some more pretty pictures about the relationship between the water and the country. This is the old system of water management, and this is some of the new infrastructure of water management. I originally went to Rotterdam with the idea to look for urban waterfront design typologies, but I did not really find examples that were readily applicable to places in the US. This was mostly because of the distinct culture and history that has defined present-day waterfront conditions in Rotterdam. Of course, there were some elements of design that could be valuable models for the US. I originally thought that most of the waterfront seemed like wasted, underutilized space, but now I believe that that is because the water is such an integrated part of everyday life in Rotterdam that people think that waterfront is, in a way, a forgotten space. Excuse me, but I think that the waterfront is, in a way, a forgotten space. It is not thought of as a place that needs to be celebrated with a waterfront park. I do think that there could be more attention paid to softening the edges in Rotterdam with landscape design. If the city continues to develop the waterfront as they have, constructing buildings without any attention to the areas surrounding the building, then they are not using their full set of development tools. The waterfront has huge potential to become a more active and pleasing social space by using landscape design to fully engage the site. And that is all. Thank you.